Hello, and welcome to the Times Journeys webinar, Women and Society in India. My name is Desiree Littman, and I'm the Program and Marketing Assistant here at Times Journeys. During this webinar, you'll learn about this unique tour as I walk you through the itinerary. You'll also hear an interview with Harleen Singh, the expert joining our 2016 departure. Before we start, why travel with the New York Times? First of all, each of our departures is accompanied by a Times journalist or subject matter specialist. Choose from our program of over 55 itineraries, including land-based trips and specialty cruises to destinations that tell a story. Lastly, our tours offer opportunities to escape the crowds and get an authentic experience. To give you a brief overview of the tour, this is a 10-day, 9-night itinerary that begins with your arrival in Delhi. On day 2, you'll explore New and Old Delhi and see mosques, forts, and modern landmarks. You'll spend one more day in Delhi before continuing on to Agra, where you'll see the stunning Taj Mahal. Journey on to Jaipur that afternoon. Spend day 5, 6, and 7 in the Pink City and celebrate Diwali. On day 8, fly to Mumbai, the financial capital of India and the heart of Bollywood, where you'll stay for the remainder of your tour. The tour includes all of your accommodations, your tour manager, and all local guides, as well as most of your meals. During this trip, you'll visit historic sites such as the Taj Mahal and the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Agra Fort. You'll take a city tour of Mumbai and see the Gateway of India. Trip highlights include meeting with women working in India's parliament, celebrating Diwali with a local family, and meeting with women in the business of Bollywood. Accompanying our 2016 tour will be Harleen Singh. She was born and brought up in India, and she is an author and a professor of women's studies at Brandeis University. We'll now hear a recording of an interview Harleen held for us recently with the tour operator who runs our Women in Focus tours, Academic Travel Abroad. During this interview, you'll hear her discuss her background, what elements of the tour are most exciting to her, and why this trip is such a unique opportunity.
Harleen Singh is our expert for the New York Times journey on women in India. And Harleen, we're wondering if you could just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background, and in particular why your background is a fit for this trip.
So I think the fact that I am from India, of course, is not the only thing that makes me appropriate or unique to lead the tour. I was born and brought up in India, but I also came to the United States as a student at the age of 18 and went on to do my bachelor's and then my master's and my PhD in the United States. So I think I bring to the tour a uniquely Indian American perspective that allows me both to speak for women in India, but to also ask questions for Americans going to visit India. I think that having been a student at a women's college in India, my apologies, for a women's college in the United States, Sweetbriar College, and then going to California for my master's and PhD at the University of California, San Diego, allowed me a really wide perspective also on the American experience. The East Coast, the West Coast, the Southern lifestyle, the Californian lifestyle. And I think it has allowed me to both educate myself, but also to understand the unique perspectives that Americans may have as travelers to India. So I think that having the cultural, religious experience of being born and brought up in India in an Indian family, in a multicultural family. My mother was a Hindu, my father is from Punjab, is a Sikh. So coming from a multi-religious family, which itself was a rare thing in the 70s when they got married, I think gives me a really not more unique than others, but perhaps a more appropriate background that allows me to speak to many different facets of the experience of India and the United States. I think also as someone who was educated in women's colleges And that because I work in women's studies and in literature and history and South Asian studies, I remain committed also not only to women as a category of academic study, but I remain committed to women's lives. I remain committed to women's empowerment. So it's important for me that a tour like this be in the service in some ways of improving women's lives. So I want to think in some small measures that as we travel to India, we're helping not only bring those experiences back with us to the United States, but we are allowing for that experience of women in India to become somewhat larger than just one life, another life, or one newspaper article. So this is something that I wanted to really get across, that for me, this tour is not just about getting people to visit India, but it is about getting people to engage with women in India. And that is deeply important for me.
Maybe you could say a little bit more about what really excites you about this trip. Why India? Why women in India? Why now?
Well, I think the thing that really excites me about this trip is, in fact, the title when it first came out, the idea of Women in India, a tour that is really focused on looking at women in India not just as a newspaper article, but as a living entity, people who are living, working, existing in India. And women in India have been a very important part of the population for as long as India has been there. Of course, that doesn't always mean that they get the best of everything. They have, as we all know, not had the best opportunities in education, health, professional being, and their families and their domestic lives. There is all of that as well. But women in India since before independence and after have been in positions of government, positions of cultural and social importance. And I think it's important to be able to balance both the idea of women as a traditional cultural entity, demographic of India, and also the lives of women in modern India. And I think there's more to it than a simple newspaper article can convey. And that's why, for me, this idea of a Women in India tour allows us to have both the tourist experience, the experience of monuments and people and color and vibrancy, but also a sustained look at where women in India are going and what they're doing and where they will be in the future and where they are now.
Could you say a little bit more about how you bring your scholarly research into a particular, historical Indian woman into the lives of these millions of Indian women every day, and what it means for American women, probably mostly American women, who will be on this Times journey?
Well, I mean, you may know, but as my research, my first book was on the Rani of Jhansi, an Indian queen who led her troops in battle against the British in the 19th century, in 1857. And my scholarly work has been, a navigation and a evaluation of her narrative in historical and literary archives. Her story has been told in countless British novels, Indian poetry, Indian film, Indian popular culture. And my work has really been to try to evaluate what it means to have this woman's story told so many times, and to try to search for her voice in the midst of all of these stories. People are almost always talking about the silences by which women are identified. And in some ways, I looked at the noise by which she's identified. She's such a famous figure. She's spoken of in so many different ways, for so many different purposes. But what are those purposes? How is she being mobilized as a female figure of history? And I think that allows me to really bring a unique perspective to the question of women in India, right? How are we looking towards them as these sentinels, as these reservoirs of culture, tradition, religion, but at the same time expecting them to be citizens of modern India, productive citizens of modern India, shoulder to shoulder with everybody else in terms of professional, educational, technical facilities, and yet always being able to embody in some ways the traditional category. So I think women are uniquely positioned in India between tradition and modernity. and I'm an Indian woman, uniquely positioned between the two. So I think I bring to this tour not only an academic background, but a personal background, both of India, the United States, both academic and cultural, traditional as well as modern. And I think that makes for a very good combination, if if I have to say so myself.
We agree. What do you think the study of women in India offers the rest of the world right now?
Hmm. Everything. I think the study of women in India, right now the world itself, I think, is poised at this crucial juncture of trying to evaluate where we stand with regards to tradition, religion, our backgrounds, our cultural identities, and our modern status as people of nations, of countries, of particular geopolitical backgrounds, Europeans, Asians, Africans, so on and so forth. And I think looking at women in India and the ways in which their existence navigates these two completely oppositional trajectories of tradition and modernity, sometimes, I think allows us a unique insight into the ways in which we in the world should be navigating or are able to navigate. I don't know if it's the right way or the wrong way, but I think we may have an insight into the ways in which we are positioned today in the world between tradition and modernity.
All right. Well, zooming back into the details of this tour and this trip, what do you see as the main highlights of the trip? The specific points on the itinerary that really excite you the most?
Well, of course, we'll be going to Delhi and to Jaipur, Agra, to the Taj Mahal, and then to Bombay, or Mumbai as it is known now. So, of course, we're going to the two metropolitan centers of India. And I think that is, for me, a great place, a great location from which to start looking at women and how they signify both these, or straddle both culture and modern lives. I think I'm extremely excited about the fact that we are going to couple tourism with meetings with women who are in positions of government and positions of business and other social enterprise. And I think to me that makes the most sense to not only look at India as this, as this location of great monuments, the Taj Mahal, history, a great archive of the past, but also to look at it as a kind of crucible for the future, right? How is it a laboratory of where we're headed in modern lives? And I think being able to meet with women who are in all these positions of authority and power, as well as women who are working with the underprivileged, with minorities in India, I think will allow us a unique insight into India.
You'll be lecturing, of course, to the group. Could you tell us a little bit about the lectures you're planning for the group and how you plan on framing them? And yeah, go ahead.
Well, so first of all, I mean, I'm not sure if this comes across or not with all the books in the background yet, but I'm hoping that the lectures will not simply be bookish academic lectures to which you go to and the topic really interests you, but then 15 minutes into it, you're really wondering how many words you're going to be able to describe the same thing in. So I really want to make sure that the lectures are accessible and in some ways also intellectually challenging. So I think I want to start first of all with giving people a larger informative lecture on tradition, mythology, history, the ways in which these narratives have framed women, both in the spiritual, religious, and mythological sense, but also how these mythological symbols have then framed women in their everyday lives. So I want to start by looking at a kind of historical, archival, mythological look at women. So I think I would like to have a first couple of lectures based on that. Second, on the ways in which women have been involved in social movements in India, from the time of the anti-British struggle to the ways in which women worked with Gandhi, the ways in which they were involved in the struggle for independence, for the nonviolence movement, and how they were key players in both the movement up to independence and after. And thirdly, I'd like to look at women and how they were, how they have played out, how they're, well, some key characters and how their lives have played out in the public sphere. So looking at key figures like Indira Gandhi and others who have been key political figures in India, Sonia Gandhi for more, and others. You know, Sonia Gandhi was an Italian woman married to the Indian Prime Minister's son, who went on to become an Indian and became pivotal in Indian politics. So I really want to look at women in these public spheres, how these large public figures created a particular narrative of powerful women in India. And fourthly, I don't know if it'll be lastly, but I'd like to look at the ways in which women's lives as underprivileged, as oppressed and exploited. I don't want to shy away from the narratives of rape, violence, caste, the ways in which all of these things have actually played into very difficult conditions for women's existence. I don't want this to be a tour or a lecture series that is simply about this great mythological background without really looking at the ways in which the great histories of mythology have not really panned out for women's actual lives. So I want to make sure that we traverse in some ways the larger archival, mythological, historical history, couple it with women's social movement, women's participation in social movements, going on to women's participation in the public sphere, but making sure we pay attention to the ways in which real violence and oppression have affected women's lives in India.
This is our last question. We thought maybe you could put yourself in the position of the travelers who will be on this trip and anticipate the questions that they might have about the trip, about women in India, and attempt to address them ahead of time.
Okay. Well, I think one of the first things that I look at, not only as a traveler on this trip, but as anybody who is unfamiliar with India and is hearing the stories about India or reading the New York Times, and one of the questions I might have is women in India. I mean, what can this tour be about? What we hear about women in India is really a sad story of exploitation and oppression and grave violence. And so, someone might ask, well, what else? And that's precisely, I think, what I've tried to talk about in talking about the lectures I would give, that in fact there's a lot more to talking about women's lives in India than simply violence and oppression. However, we cannot have an either-or situation. The fact that there is a lot more about women's lives in India doesn't obscure the fact that great violence besets their existence. But, violence also doesn't obscure the fact that women have made great strides in the public sphere, in the cultural, academic sphere, technological sphere in India. So I think, as a first-time traveler to India, first of all, India is large, it's overwhelming sometimes, it's colorful and wonderful, but, for the first-time traveler, it's not only the experience of the country, but trying to think about how that experience may be in the service of a pursuit of women in India. I mean, how are we going to try to make sense of women in India, within the space of 10 days, 3 cities, and looking at and understanding all of this large cultural heritage that most people spend their lives on. So I think as a first-time traveler, I would wonder about that. And in answer to that question, I would say, well, there's a lot more to it than that. I think a first-time traveler also might wonder, well, women, the other part that we see of women in India is this great cultural, colorful existence where women are involved in handicrafts. They're always dressed beautifully. There's so much color around them. They're involved in every aspect of domestic and cultural life. So how is it that women can be these larger than life characters in this play and yet be part of the most oppressed classes of India? So I think, that there's real confusion in some ways, and that a greater clarity may be sought by actually being in India, by actually looking at the ways in which women negotiate all of these different categories. So I think a trip like this, which is not only tourism, a visit to, of course, the Taj Mahal, one of the great wonders of the world. And I've stood in front of the Taj Mahal many times, and I can tell you every time um, I'm awestruck by the magnificence and sheer size of the monument. It's something to behold. But, in front of that monument are also countless Indian women who toil around it, who live around it, and whose lives are giving meaning to how India defines itself as a modern nation. So I think that having, in some ways, the tourism be in the service of real travel. And to me, real travel is not just about taking places off your list, but about gaining an experience and insight into the places we go to.
Thank you to Harleen for holding that interview for us. It's great to hear her perspective on the tour and get a preview of her lecture topics. I'm now going to go over some frequently asked questions we get about our tours. First, a question we're often asked is whether or not international airfare is included, and the answer is no. And that's because we found that most of our guests prefer to use miles, and this provides them with the flexibility to do so. Secondly, what are the physical requirements of the tour and how much walking will there be? We recommend that you are able to walk for 3 hours unaided over uneven ground for these tours. What documentation is needed for travel? Well, you will need a valid passport at the time of travel, and the tour operator will assist you with all necessary visas or travel documents that you might need for your trip. Lastly, what should you pack? Before your departure, you will be provided with a detailed packing list for your trip that will ensure you have all the necessary clothes and items for your tour. Just to recap, the tour has 2 departures, one in October 2016 and one in October 2017. It is limited to 25 travelers. This is a 10-day tour with a cost starting at $6,895, and there is a single supplement of $1,680. If you would like more information on this itinerary, you can visit our website or call our call center at 855-698-7979 to book your space. Thank you for listening.